Welcome to the Pagan Corner podcast. I am G.D.Hancock, your host, and Paul Bishop is once again my guest speaker. Today we will discuss the question of spiritual search and how to be happy. You know what's fascinating? Studies show that 85% of people who engage in regular spiritual practices report significantly higher levels of happiness and life satisfaction. Yet most of us spend our lives chasing external markers of success instead.
That's such an interesting data point, and it really makes you wonder about how we've been approaching the whole concept of happiness in modern society.
Well, what's particularly striking is how this connects to recent research in positive psychology. Studies from Harvard's longitudinal happiness study show that people with strong spiritual or philosophical frameworks tend to be more resilient during life's challenges and maintain more stable levels of well-being over time.
Hmm. Speaking of resilience, how does this spiritual foundation actually translate into practical benefits?
So here's what's fascinating about that. Researchers have found that people who maintain regular spiritual practices show a 23% reduction in stress-related health issues and report 40% stronger social connections. It's like having this internal shock absorber that helps you navigate life's ups and downs more smoothly.
That reminds me of the neurological studies showing how meditation and spiritual practices literally reshape our brain's neural pathways. The science behind this is pretty remarkable.
Exactly right. And what's really interesting is how this brain restructuring affects decision making. People with consistent spiritual practices show enhanced activity in the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for complex problem solving and emotional regulation. They're literally rewiring their brains for better life choices.
You know what's particularly striking about that? It challenges the common assumption that spirituality is somehow separate from practical life success.
Well, that's precisely why I find the latest research so compelling. Studies show that companies with leaders who incorporate spiritual or mindfulness practices see an average 22% increase in employee satisfaction and a 15% boost in productivity. It's not just about personal well being, it has tangible impacts on our professional lives too.
That makes me think about how this relates to our current mental health crisis. Have you seen the recent statistics on that?
Oh, yes, and they're quite sobering. Mental health professionals report that patients who incorporate some form of spiritual practice into their treatment plan show a 35% higher recovery rate from depression and anxiety. But here's what's really interesting. It doesn't matter what specific spiritual path they follow, it's the act of engaging with something greater than themselves that seems to make the difference.
That's fascinating how it transcends specific belief systems. What other patterns have emerged from the research?
Well, one of the most surprising findings is about gratitude practices, which are common in spiritual traditions. People who maintain daily gratitude journals show a 28% increase in optimism and a 16% decrease in reported physical ailments. But you know what's really interesting? These benefits only show up when the gratitude practice is tied to a larger framework of meaning.
So it's not just about going through the motions, there needs to be a deeper connection.
Exactly, and this brings us to another fascinating discovery. Research from the University of Pennsylvania shows that people who engage in spiritual practices with a community show 45% stronger immune system responses than those who practice alone. It's like there's this powerful synergy between personal spiritual practice and social connection.
That's really interesting about the community aspect. How does this translate to our increasingly digital world?
That's where things get really interesting. Recent studies show that even virtual spiritual communities can provide significant benefits, with participants reporting a 30% increase in feelings of connection and purpose. But, and this is crucial, the practice needs to be consistent and authentic, not just casual or superficial engagement.
Speaking of authenticity, how does this relate to the current trend of wellness and self-care?
Well, here's what's fascinating about that. While the global wellness industry is worth over $4.5 trillion, research shows that people who focus solely on external wellness practices, without addressing spiritual or existential questions, report only temporary improvements in life satisfaction. It's like treating the symptoms without addressing the root cause.
That really brings us back to where we started. the fundamental connection between spiritual searching and genuine happiness.
Exactly, and the data really supports this. Long-term studies show that people who maintain consistent spiritual practices report 60% higher levels of life satisfaction after 10 years compared to those who don't. But perhaps most importantly, they show greater resilience during life's inevitable challenges, with a 40% faster recovery rate from major life setbacks.
That's quite remarkable when you think about the implications for society as a whole.
Indeed, and you know what might be the most important takeaway from all this research? It's that happiness isn't something we find through external achievements or material success. It's something we uncover through this process of spiritual growth and self-discovery. The numbers don't lie. People who prioritize spiritual development consistently report higher levels of sustained happiness and life satisfaction across all demographic categories. Well, that just about wraps up this session of Pagan Corner for today. Thank you, Paul, for joining me, and thank